Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Well, hello, and welcome back, everybody, to the Pilates Goddess podcast. It's Lynda here, and I want to make an announcement, which is that I am accepting interview requests for this podcast. And in fact, this week I'm interviewing Alan Menezes from Australia. And next week I am interviewing Alison Marsh from Pregnancy Pilates Impact. And so I've got a few fun guests coming up for the Pilates world. Again, whether you're a client or a teacher, I think you'll find these very interesting. And so if you are interested in being a guest here, hit me up. Send me an email, Lynda@lyndalippin.com. Hit me up on any social, leave comments, direct messages, but let me know. And we can chat. So today's topic is exercise for bone health. Now, this is kind of an interesting topic for me because I am known as a bone health expert, and I do teach mostly osteoporosis friendly, strong bones, bone health classes. I also have a big interest in bone health personally, because if you don't know me, this might be too much information, but it's my podcast, so I don't care. But I had endometriosis pretty severely for my entire reproductive life. And I finally dealt with that and had a total abdominal hysterectomy in where they removed everything, my uterus and my ovaries, probably 30 years ago, 25 years ago. So now I was put into menopause like immediately, and I have been off all hormone replacement for the past, I would say, 3 or 4 years. So at 55, about to turn 56, that kind of puts me into the group of women who are prone to weaker bones and to osteoporosis. But I am also happy to share with you that in my last spine MRI, that my thoracic spine is extraordinarily strong. My bones are very dense, according to my neurologist, and I am not really to worry about osteoporosis and weakening of bone for a number of decades, providing I keep doing everything that I'm doing for myself. So today I'm going to outline for you a little bit of what you need to be doing for yourself. If you're concerned with bone health, if you're concerned with bone strength, if you already have low bone density, or if you're just kind of moving into that time of life where you're getting a little more worried about it. And I think that this information should be interesting to women of all ages. And I'm going to tell you why right now. And that is because it is a fact that we build most of our bone density when we're in our late teens and 20s. Now, for me, those were the years when I was actually eating the least, partying the most, probably the least concerned with my bone health because, when you're in your teens and 20s, you think that you're going to live forever and are completely, impervious to horrible health issues. So, one of the best things we can do for our daughters and one of the best things you can do for yourself if you happen to be listening in your late teens to early 20s is start doing regular weight-bearing exercise. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And make sure that you're eating enough food, that you're eating enough protein, that you're getting enough calcium and vitamin D and all of those fun things. Those are not the years to just try to be super skinny, which is, what I did and what many people do. Now, because I knew that I had some hormonal issues and some bone health issues, when I was in my 30s and 40s, I really started to focus on at least appropriate exercise, even if I wasn't still always eating enough or eating correctly. All my doctors were also concerned about this, so they made sure that I was on hormone replacements, that I was getting all of the calcium and all of the other things that I needed. And, we're really kind of tracking me for bone health and for everything else. Interestingly enough, being heavier doesn't necessarily put more stress on your bones. I'm going to say that again. Being heavier doesn't necessarily put more good stress on your bones. And the reason for that is that most of the side effects that go along with obesity help weaken your bones. And that is typically less movement, typically less exercise, typically less weight bearing on the bones, so that the bones, even though ostensibly when you're bearing weight on them, they're bearing more weight, the bones still tend to get weaker. So what do we do about this? Luckily, there's a whole lot that we can do about it. Okay. The first thing is looking at your hormones. So you can talk to your physician about this, but of course, some kind of estrogen replacement or hormone replacement therapy is one of the best things you can do to maintain bone density. Now, there's a whole lot of other issues with estrogen replacement and hormone replacement therapy. You're also looking at what your heart health looks like, what your breast cancer risk looks like. There's a whole lot of other stuff there. So this is a decision to be made when you are speaking with your physicians. But, looking at hormone replacement therapy as something to help strengthen your bones is not necessarily a bad thing. The second thing is making sure that you are eating well and that you are eating enough. Specifically, you need to be eating enough protein. Now, most of the women who I work with struggle to get in the fat and the protein. We all still have it somehow deep inside of us from everything we've been taught about how to eat or not eat or stay thin or whatever else, that fat isn't good for us. And therefore, the proteins that might attach to the fat aren't great for us. So suddenly I see women who aren't eating a lot of meat. Some are going vegan. Some are doing, different things with their diets. And frankly, my friends, that's all fine. Like, I eat meat. I eat everything. But if you don't, you really need to be on point about getting in all of your macronutrients. You need that protein, you need those fats, you need those carbs. So if you're vegan or vegetarian, you really need to do some research and find out how to make sure that you are getting those basic building blocks into your body. Okay. If you're taking calcium citrate is a little more easily absorbed than calcium carbonate. And if you're taking calcium, taking it with some magnesium and with some vitamin D will help everything absorb and be used by your body a lot better and a lot easier. And then we want to look at exercise. Now, really, of all the things that we're talking about, and I haven't even mentioned medications, okay? There are medication interventions that you can have when you have low bone density. There are a number of them on the market, Prolia, Beniva. What these actually do is they help signal bone growth from the inside of your body. The problem with these medications is that once you start using them, you need to continue taking them for the rest of your life. So, what they discovered when they started giving people Prolia is that Prolia works really well. And at first, they thought that they could just give people Prolia, they could take it for a certain period of time and then stop and their bones would stay strong. But oh no, it turns out that that the bone strength that you get, the remodeling that you get from the medication goes away very quickly once you stop having the medication in your body. So, say women with osteoporosis who had great improvements while taking Prolia had the quickest loss of bone when they stopped using the drug. So, just know that. Does that mean that you shouldn't use it? Absolutely not. But it just means that you kind of need to know what, the upshot of that is going to be moving forward in your life. But all of these interventions, right? The hormone replacements, the Prolia, and the other bone remodeling medications, and eating well and eating enough, all of those will be improved by adding in appropriate weight-bearing exercise. They've actually done a lot of studies showing that for women who engage in weight-bearing exercise, and again, we'll talk about what that means, because weight-bearing for an osteoporosis body does not include things like plow in yoga or inversions where the legs are going overhead. Weight-bearing means weight-bearing on your feet generally, or weight-bearing on your arms in something like a plank or a push-up, or on all fours. Okay. But women who do weight-bearing exercise and do it regularly lose less bone over the course of time and gain more bone density when you combine the exercise with the good diet, with the possible medication interventions, and with potential hormone replacement. So the one thing that we know will always help the body feel better, function better, and have bone remodeling happen at a relatively fast rate, the one thing that we know does that is exercise. So if you already have osteoporosis or osteopenia, or don't know and are simply assume that you have, there are certain movements that you really want to avoid. And these have also been clinically studied. One of the major movements that you want to avoid is what we call upper back or thoracic flexion. And that is where you're bending forward from your upper spine. Now, why do we want to avoid that? We want to avoid that because those thoracic vertebrae, which are the vertebrae that attach to your rib cage. Okay, so they're the ones that curve out to the back behind you and that all of your ribs attach to. Those vertebrae can easily fracture when you have osteoporosis or osteopenia, and they crush fracture when you go into that forward flexion. Okay? What does forward flexion look like if you're not getting an image of what that's like in your brain? An abdominal crunch, a full sit up or roll up, a spine stretch forward, a legs back overhead, kind of, plow or rollover or jackknife in Pilates, a roll down from standing, a roll down from sitting or kneeling. So when you have osteoporosis or osteopenia or any low bone density situation, what you want to do is work on spine extension as much as possible. You want to learn how to keep your spine long, how to keep your spine straight, and then how to get movement at your shoulder joints, at your hip joints, at your knee joints, and your ankle joints that will allow you to do things like bend forward from your hips with a straight spine in a good deadlift and pick something heavy up off the floor. Okay. You also want to avoid huge movements in hyperextension, which is a back bend. Okay. You want to do some back bending, yes, but you want to avoid, again, huge movements, because it's the huge movements where you can get bone hitting against bone, which can cause a fracture. And you want to avoid huge rotations. So a small amount of head-led rotation. So you're turning your head, and then as your head turns, your shoulders turn a little and your ribs turn a little. That's great. That kind of keeps your neck mobile. It keeps your spine mobile enough that if you need to parallel park in a car that isn't, electronically telling you what's behind you, you can actually look and do that and see where you're going in a safe way. That bit of rotation can also help you if you're a golfer and wish to continue playing golf. It will also help you if you play tennis, right? So a little bit of head-led rotation, learning how to keep the spine long and lifted and extended, and then learning how to work mobility in the arms and in the shoulders and the elbows, the wrists and the hips and the knees and the ankles and the feet is really the way to go. The better your spine is stacked and the better your bones are stacked when you're standing, the better force you're going to get into those bones to keep them strong and to keep the muscles around them strong. And this is true really whether you have low bone density or not, okay? But if you have low bone density, it's important because going into those other movements can be dangerous. It's something that we call loaded flexion, and it has to do with gravity and gravity kind of assisting in that rounding of the upper back and that rounding forward of the spine. Okay. Or, worse, you're on your back and you're either curling up or you're rolling back, and then you have both gravity and your body weight going into those bones in a non-optimal way. All right. And the problem, because I work with a lot of women who have had compression and wedge fractures in their thoracic vertebrae prior to working with me, the problem there is that once those fractures happen, they don't really heal that well. And the only way to get them to kind of solidify is by injecting something called bone cement into the actual vertebrae. Okay. When you say you're younger, your bones are healthy, you have a spine fracture, or you have something going on, they can actually go in and kind of surgically, deal with that. They can fuse things, they can put metal in. But once your bones are weakened, you don't have that option anymore, right? Because they're not going to drill metal support into a bone that's crumbling and that's weak. That can't happen. So they've, discovered that they can take something like a cement that the body will accept and inject that right into the bone. It's probably about as fun as it sounds. So these are things that you really want to try to avoid. Okay. The one position, there is a position actually where you can go into some spine rounding and some flexion and have it be okay. And that's when you're on all fours. So if you're already on all fours and you're pushing away from the ground to move into some upper back flexion or rounding, like in a cat-cow situation, that's actually okay. That's unloaded flexion. And, if you're a trainer or a Pilates teacher listening to this, that's a place where you can give your clients that experience of having, that nice feeling of spreading the shoulder blades apart and getting a little bit of rounding into that upper back in a way that's not going to potentially crush a vertebrae or crush a bone. The other thing that's really important to work on is balance and fall prevention. And I've already talked about this on the podcast, but we'll talk about it again because it's that important. The New York Times recently came out with an article that basically says that it's important to be able to stand on one leg for at least 10 seconds and balance. I would say it's probably even better if you can do it for about 30 seconds on each leg and play around with closing your eyes or closing one eye or doing different things to hold the balance. Now, why is balance so important? When your balance is better, you tend to fall less often. And if you have weaker bones and you fall, there's a good chance you're going to break something. Okay? You're going to break a hip, you're going to break a wrist, you're going to crack a rib. I've had a lot of clients and friends who didn't know that they had low bone density until they fell. For one woman, it was falling off a horse and cracking some ribs and realizing that she had low bone density. For another client, it was falling and breaking her wrist and her hip, discovering she had low bone density. For another client, it was a wedge fracture. But again, her spine was rounded. She was rounded over to pick something up. She fell in that rounded position and ended up with a wedge fracture in her thoracic vertebrae. So if we can avoid the falling, right, there's a chance that we can avoid the bones breaking. So working on balance is super important. And the way to really work on balance is to work on proper stacking of the bones in standing, proper stacking of the bones in sitting, proper placement of the bones when you're on your back if you're going into something like a bridge or a leg circle. Proper placement of the bones when you're on your stomach and you're going into hyperextension so that you work on length more than just cranking out a high lift of your upper back. All of these things are what's most important to basically maintaining our physical function and our ability to feel and function at our best for the longest period of time in our lives. And unfortunately, my husband and I were joking last night that youth is wasted on the young because when we're feeling good and we're feeling strong, we kind of abuse that. And then later on, when we're dealing with all of the negative effects of that early abuse, we're like, damn, I wish I had done a few things differently a few decades ago. Now, if you are somebody who does Pilates or does yoga or does personal training or goes to fitness classes and you're not sure if you're doing things that are appropriate for your bones and for your joints and for your potentially low bone density, I encourage you to reach out to me and we can have a discussion and we can talk about what you're doing. I offer a number of classes every week that are osteoporosis safe and I call them osteoporosis friendly. I'm also happy to do a private session with you, which we can record so that you have that workout and that feedback on your movements. There's kind of a number of things, that we can do that can simply help you feel better about the work that you're doing so that you can continue doing it. Like I said, I am a prime candidate for osteoporosis, but because I have been really working on weight bearing exercise and on spine length and on all of that for the last, 35 years, my bone density is great. My bone density is fine. So I'm going to leave you with this. Don't blow off bone health. Don't blow off bone density. Remember that muscle strength helps strengthen bones. Remember that weight-bearing exercise, standing, moving around, helps strengthen bones. Remember that doing work where your spine is extended and lifted and you're getting differentiated movement at your hips, your knees, your ankles, your shoulders, all of that is going to be great for your bone density and for moving forward. So thanks a lot for joining me. This coming Thursday, we will be having our second interview with a podcast, right? The first one was Joan Breitbart. The second one is going to be Alan Menezes. And if you don't know Alan's name, look him up like right now, because he is the man who brought Pilates to the Southern Hemisphere. So all of you Australian Pilates teachers, you have Alan to thank for bringing Pilates over to your side of the world. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.